Rustling sounds at night, food disappearing from the pantry, the quiet creak of footsteps directly over our bedroom. My husband, David, insisted I was imagining it all, that after 40 years of a stable, quiet life, my 63-year-old mind was suddenly failing me. He spoke about it with such pity, his hand patting mine a little too firmly, telling me he'd already made some calls to doctors who could help. He thought I didn't see the brochures for assisted living tucked under his car seat. But one evening, while I was pretending to be asleep, I saw him through the crack in our bedroom door carrying a dinner tray not to his study, but up the rickety pull-down stairs to the attic. The next day, I began to play my part. I started talking to myself just loudly enough for him to hear. I'd stumble over my words, forget my keys, and stare blankly at the television. I lulled him into a deep, smug sense of security. And this morning, the minute his car pulled out of the driveway for his weekly golf game, I went to the garage, took the heaviest wrench from his pristine toolbox, and walked back into the house to finally meet the hallucination he was hiding in my attic. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. My name is Margaret, and for 41 years, I believed my life was a quiet success story. David and I built a life together in this house. We raised 2 children here, sent them off to college, and settled into what I thought was a comfortable, predictable retirement. He handled the investments, he'd always been a financial planner, and I managed the home, the garden, and our social lives. We were a team, or so I thought. Looking back now, the signs were there for years, subtle as a hairline crack in a teacup. He grew distant, more critical. A bad investment was my fault for stressing him out. If he forgot a promise, it was because I never reminded him properly. It was a slow, dripping erosion of my confidence, so gradual I barely noticed it was happening. The sounds started about 3 months ago, a soft scurrying from the attic at first. I told David we had squirrels, maybe a raccoon. "Don't be silly, Maggie," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "This house is sealed tight like a drum. It's just the house settling." But old houses settle with groans and pops, not the distinct sound of footsteps. Then food started going missing. Not a lot, just odd things. A can of chicken noodle soup from the back of the pantry, a sleeve of crackers, a few apples from the fruit bowl. "You forgot you ate them, hun," he'd say, his voice thick with that condescending sympathy he'd perfected. "Your memory isn't what it used to be. It happens to all of us." He was so convincing that for a little while, I almost believed him. I started writing things down, tracking what I bought at the store, just to be sure. The list confirmed it. Things were vanishing. The final straw, the thing that woke me from my stupor, was the prescription. He brought home a little orange bottle one afternoon. "Dr. Miller thinks these might help with the, confusion," he'd said, avoiding my eyes. I looked at the label. It was a potent antipsychotic, the kind they give to people with serious delusions. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "There is nothing wrong with my mind." The look he gave me wasn't one of concern. It was a flash of pure, cold annoyance. It was the look of a man whose plans had just hit a snag. I never took a single pill. I flushed one down the toilet every morning, and he never thought to check. He just saw me at the kitchen sink with a glass of water and smiled, thinking he was winning. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Seeing him with that tray of food, it wasn't a shock as much as a click. It was the final puzzle piece snapping into place, and the ugly picture it completed was one of absolute betrayal. A man trying to have his wife committed to an institution so he could keep his secret. My first thought, I'll admit, was a hot rush of fury. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to throw that tray right in his face. But my mother, bless her soul, always said, "Never let a man see you sweat. Anger is a hot flame that burns you more than it warms anyone else." Decades of keeping a level head at PTA meetings and navigating delicate family dramas had taught me a thing or two about strategy. A screaming match would get me nowhere. He'd just twist it, use it as more proof of my instability. No, I needed a better plan. I needed to see what he was protecting in that attic, and I needed him to think I was completely out of my mind so I could do it.
So, I gave him the performance of a lifetime. The next morning, I forgot how to use the coffee maker we've had for 6 years. I stood in front of it looking helpless until he sighed and made the coffee himself. At lunch, I called him by our son's name. He corrected me gently, but I saw the triumphant little glint in his eye. He was buying every bit of it. It was sickeningly easy. All those years he'd underestimated me, seen me as just the quiet wife who arranged his dinner parties, were now my greatest weapon. He started leaving the house for longer stretches of time. Golf with friends, long trips to the hardware store. He felt safe. He thought his little problem was just about solved. Poor crazy Maggie was getting easier to manage every day. Soon, she'd be in a nice, safe place where she couldn't cause any trouble, and he could get on with whatever this was. That brings me to this morning. I waited a full hour after he left, just to be sure he wasn't coming back for a forgotten wallet. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I went to the garage and my hand hovered over the tools. A hammer felt too violent. A screwdriver, not enough. The wrench was perfect. It was heavy, solid. It felt like an equalizer. I wasn't sure what I was walking into. A cornered animal? A dangerous person? I had no idea. All I knew was that I was done being a victim in my own home. I walked to the hallway, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. I pulled the cord for the attic stairs. They unfolded with a familiar groan, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light from the hallway. Taking a deep breath, clutching the cold, heavy steel of the wrench in my hand, I put my foot on the first step and started to climb, ready to face my husband's dirty little secret. The air in the attic was thick and stale, smelling of decades of forgotten things, cedar, mothballs, and dry, brittle paper. Light struggled through a single grime-covered window at the far end, illuminating a universe of dust. My hand was slick with sweat around the wrench. Every horror movie I'd ever half-watched with my eyes covered played through my mind. But what I saw wasn't a monster. It wasn't a man. It was a woman, huddled on a stained mattress on the floor, surrounded by a pathetic little nest of my belongings. My old sewing basket was next to her. A half-eaten bag of my favorite brand of pretzels sat on a cardboard box, and she was wrapped in the college sweatshirt our son, Michael, had left behind 15 years ago. She was thin, with tired, frightened eyes, and mousy brown hair that had seen better days. She couldn't have been more than 50, and when she saw me with that wrench in my hand, she let out a tiny whimper and curled into a ball, as if preparing for a blow. All the fury, all the hot rage that had propelled me up those stairs evaporated in an instant. It was replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a threat. This was just sad. My enemy wasn't this poor creature. My enemy was downstairs sleeping in my bed every night. I lowered the wrench, letting it hang by my side. "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I expected. She flinched at the sound. "Please," she whispered, her voice raspy, "please don't be mad. He said you weren't well. He said you wouldn't understand." "He?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "My husband, David?" She nodded, pulling Michael's sweatshirt tighter around herself. "Brenda. My name is Brenda." Brenda? It was such a plain, unassuming name. For months, I had imagined a villain, a phantom, a source of evil noises in the night. And here she was. Brenda. I leaned the wrench against a stack of old yearbooks and took a step closer. She watched my every move, her eyes wide with fear. "He told you I was sick?" I asked. "He said you have episodes," she stammered, picking at a loose thread on the cuff, "that your memory is gone and you get confused, violent sometimes. He said he was making arrangements for you to go to a special home, a nice one where they could take care of you. And once that was settled, we could be together, properly." She said it like a prayer she'd been repeating to herself in the dark for months. "I lost my apartment, you see, and my job. Everything sort of fell apart. I've nobody. David said he'd take care of me. He said he loved me." I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. A laugh, brittle and sharp, escaped my lips before I could stop it. The poor woman looked horrified. "Oh, honey," I said, and the sympathy in my voice was surprisingly real. "Oh, David loves himself. You and I, we're just footnotes in the story of him." I looked around the miserable little space. "How long has he had you living up here like a squirrel?" "Almost 4 months," she mumbled, shamefaced.
4 months. For 4 months, this woman had been living above my head while my husband told me I was losing my mind. He'd brought her scraps from our table while convincing me I needed to be locked away. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. He hadn't just been cheating. He'd been orchestrating a complete psychological demolition. He played us both for fools, setting us up as enemies, this phantom in the attic and the crazy wife downstairs. But David was about to learn a very hard lesson. When 2 women he'd wronged decide to team up, he didn't stand a chance. Stick with me, because this is where the real plan begins. My brain shifted gears. The hurt was still there, a deep, crushing weight, but a cold, clear purpose was rising above it. This woman wasn't my enemy. She was my weapon. "Brenda," I said, my tone softening, "I'm not going to hurt you. On the contrary, I think we might be able to help each other." I sat down on an old trunk, a few feet away from her mattress, making sure my movements were slow and non-threatening. "Tell me something. Did David ever give you a firm date on this divorce? A timeline for when I'd be going to this special home?" Brenda hesitated, then shook her head. "He just said, soon. He said the lawyers were working on it, but it was delicate because of my condition." "My condition," I repeated, letting the words hang in the dusty air. "My condition is that I trusted my husband for 41 years. That's a pre-existing condition, I suppose." I leaned forward slightly. "Brenda, has it ever occurred to you that he has no intention of divorcing me? That this," I said, gesturing around the attic, "is your permanent solution as far as he's concerned?" The fear in her eyes began to mingle with a flicker of doubt. "No," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He wouldn't. He loves me. He's a good man." "A good man doesn't keep the woman he loves in his attic," I said flatly. "A good man doesn't systematically try to convince his wife she's insane to cover his tracks. You need to understand something about David. He's not just a liar, he's a manipulator, and he's scarily good at it. He gets into your head. It's like a trance. He makes you believe what he wants you to believe, what's convenient for him. He's been doing it to me for years, slowly chipping away at my confidence. Now he's doing it to you, telling you he's your savior while he keeps you locked up like a prisoner." I watched her face as I spoke. I could see the wheels turning. She was likely remembering all the times he'd made a promise and then backtracked, all the vague answers to direct questions. Her world, which was already balanced on a nice edge, was starting to wobble. I pressed my advantage. "What do you know about his finances, Brenda? Has he shared any details?" Because the man I know is meticulous about his money, cautious, risk-averse. Locking me away would cost a fortune, and a divorce would cost him half of everything. Does he seem like a man who's about to give up half his retirement? He said his investments were doing really well, that he had a plan to protect his assets. His assets, I mused, not our assets. That sounds about right. I stood up. The plan was forming, clear as a bell. Brenda was scared, vulnerable, and completely dependent on David. But she was inside the walls of my house, and she'd been his confidant. She was a potential treasure trove of information. The first step was to get her out of his control and into mine. You're not staying up here another minute. You're going to come downstairs, you're going to take a hot shower in the guest bathroom, and I am going to make you a real meal, not just whatever leftovers David sneaks up to you. She looked at me, a mixture of terror and hope in her eyes. But what happens when he gets home? A slow, cold smile spread across my face. When he gets home, you'll be back up here, and I'll be downstairs acting crazier than ever. He will never, ever know we spoke. From this moment on, you and I have a secret. We're going to keep playing our parts, you as the hidden damsel in distress, and me as the doddering old wife downstairs. But behind the scenes, you and I are going to find out exactly what plan he has for his assets. And then we're going to take every single penny. Brenda looked at me as if I just offered her a winning lottery ticket that might also be a bomb. Trusting me was a huge leap of faith. But staying in that attic, waiting for the crumbs of affection and food David offered her, was a slow death sentence. She knew it. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, she gave a tiny, decisive nod. "Okay," she whispered. That one word was the starting gun. We didn't have time for a long heart-to-heart. David's golf game usually lasted 4 hours, 5 if his buddies convinced him to stay for a beer at the clubhouse. I figured we had a 2-hour window tops. "Right," I said, all business. "Rule number 1. From this moment on, we are never in the same room unless that attic door is shut and locked. Rule number 2. We never speak of this downstairs. Sounds carry. Rule number 3. When David is home, your existence is a secret I do not know, and my existence is that of a confused woman on the verge of a breakdown. Do you understand?" She nodded again, more firmly this time. Survival is a powerful motivator.
Getting her down the creaky attic stairs was the first challenge. We went one step at a time, pausing to listen, even though we knew the house was empty. It felt like a jailbreak in reverse. Once she was in the guest bathroom, I handed her a stack of fresh towels and some of my lavender-scented soap. As she showered, I went to the kitchen and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I cooked a real meal. Not the simple, joyless dinners I'd been making for David and myself, but a proper omelet, fluffy and filled with cheese and peppers, with a side of buttered toast and 3 strips of crispy bacon. The aroma filled the house, a defiant scent of normalcy in a home that was anything but. When she came out, wrapped in my oversized terry cloth robe with her hair damp, she looked like a different person. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a fragile spark of hope. She ate at the kitchen island, hunched over the plate like she was afraid someone would snatch it away. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat opposite her. "Brenda," I started gently, "I need you to tell me everything David has told you about his finances. Every boast, every complaint, every little offhand comment. It doesn't matter how small it seems." And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. She chewed her toast thoughtfully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "He mostly complained," she began. "Said the market was terrible. Said his retirement fund took a huge hit last year. He complained a lot about you, too." "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said with a wave of my hand. "I can imagine. What else?" He said your spending was out of control, that your shopping habits were going to land them in the poorhouse. This was so ludicrous. I almost laughed out loud. My biggest extravagance in the last year was a new pair of orthopedic sneakers. This was classic David. Create a fictional problem to justify a monstrous solution. He was laying the groundwork, I murmured, mostly to myself, building a narrative for the doctors and lawyers that I'm mentally incompetent. Keep going. There was one thing, she said, her voice dropping. A few weeks ago, he was on the phone. He gets loud when he's in his study, and I can hear him sometimes through the floor. He was talking to someone he called Arthur. He was laughing, and he said something like, "She'll never find the Antilles account. By the time she even knows it exists, it'll all be safe and sound." She looked at me, her eyes questioning. "What are the Antilles?" My blood ran cold. The Netherlands Antilles, a well-known offshore tax haven. For 40 years, David had preached conservative investing. Index funds, municipal bonds, a portfolio so boring it could put an accountant to sleep. It was his whole identity. David the prudent. David the trustworthy. The man who clipped coupons and lectured me about using the premium gasoline. And all along, he was stashing money offshore. This wasn't just hiding assets for a divorce. This was a level of deception that was almost diabolical. "Brenda," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you may have just saved both our lives." The clock on the stove told me our time was up. We tidied every trace of her presence, washing the dishes, wiping the counter, making sure not a single one of her hairs was left in the guest bathroom. As she climbed back up the attic stairs, she turned and looked at me. "He'll be home soon," she said, a flicker of the old fear returning. "I know," I said, my face hardening into a mask of placid resolve. "Let the show begin." That evening, I gave a performance worthy of an Oscar. I put the salt in the sugar bowl. I tried to answer the ringing house phone by picking up the TV remote. I stared at David with a completely blank expression and asked him, "I'm sorry, have we met?" He played his part too, all patient sighs and sad, knowing looks. He was so smug, so confident in my decline, he barely noticed when I accidentally spilled a cup of coffee all over a stack of his mail that had been sitting on the end table. "Oh goodness, look at me, I'm so clumsy," I cried, dabbing at the mess with a napkin, my hands shaking convincingly. "It's all right, dear, it's all right," he said, snatching the soggy letters away. "Let me handle it." But I'd already seen what I needed to see. One of the envelopes was from a bank I'd never heard of, with a post office box in a city I knew was a hub for international wire transfers. While he was busy trying to salvage his precious mail, I made a mental note of the name. Step 1 was complete. Our new routine fell into a strange rhythm. During the day, while David was out, Brenda would come down. We'd pore over my memories of our finances, trying to piece together the puzzle. She had the keywords, Antilles, Arthur, and I had the context of 40 years. I remembered an Arthur Willis, a college buddy of David's, who'd always struck me as shady, the kind of guy who wore a pinky ring and laughed too loud. I found him online. He was now a wealth management consultant, based out of Panama. The pieces were slotting together with horrifying speed. My job was to be the agent of chaos. Under the guise of my confusion, I became an expert at intelligence gathering. I'd wander into his study while he was on a conference call, mumbling about looking for my knitting needles, all the while taking a mental snapshot of the papers on his desk. One afternoon, he left his laptop open. I stumbled and had to brace myself on his desk, hitting a few keys by accident. I managed to hit Control+P, sending a copy of his current screen to the printer in the other room. He grumbled at my clumsiness and closed the laptop. An hour later, after he'd left for the store, I retrieved the printout. It was an email from Arthur with flight details to Curacao. The trip was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks. That was our deadline. The clock was ticking, and my husband was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman you've decided to dispose of.
The flimsy piece of printer paper in my hand felt heavier than a stone tablet. Flight confirmation to Curacao. Departure in 21 days. I waited until the dead of night until David's snores were a steady, rhythmic rumble beside me, a sound I had once found comforting and now found repulsive. I slipped out of bed, crept to the hallway, and gave the softest possible tap on the attic door. A moment later, a sliver of light appeared and Brenda's face peered down anxious. I held up the paper, and even in the dim light, I saw her eyes widen. The deadline was real. Our clandestine meetings became more intense, fueled by a shared sense of urgency. We spent hours in the guest room with the door locked, whispering, mapping out David's life, my life, on sheets of notebook paper. We listed every asset I could remember: this house, the small lake cabin we inherited from my parents, the retirement accounts I had blissfully ignored for decades. Against this, we had a shadowy list of unknowns: the Antilles account, Arthur Willis, and whatever financial poison pill he was flying to Curacao to swallow. "He's got to have the paperwork somewhere," Brenda said one afternoon, nervously chewing on her thumbnail. We were sharing a pot of tea and a plate of cookies at the kitchen island, a small act of domestic defiance. A man like David, so meticulous, he wouldn't just keep it all in his head. He'd have a file, a ledger, something. She was right. David was a creature of habit and documentation. He had receipts for a 30-year-old lawnmower, for God's sakes. The problem was his study. It was his fortress. He kept it locked when he wasn't in it, and the one time I'd used the emergency key from the top of the doorframe to get in, he'd noticed a book was a half-inch out of place and interrogated me about it for an hour. "I remember," Brenda said suddenly, her eyes unfocused. "When he's on the phone with Arthur, he paces, but sometimes when he hangs up, I hear a specific set of sounds: a scrape, a click, and then 3 little beeps. It comes from the wall behind his desk." We looked at each other. The big, tacky landscape painting his mother gave us for our 10th anniversary hung on the wall behind his desk. "A safe," I breathed. Of course. It was a cliché, but so was cheating on your wife and hiding your mistress in the attic. David was nothing if not predictable. David had built a fortress of lies, but he made one critical error. He locked me on the inside with him, and I was about to start using my key. Now we had a new problem. We knew the safe existed, but we had no way of knowing the combination. Prying it open was out of the question, and hiring a safecracker wasn't exactly in my wheelhouse. The combination had to come from David himself. I needed to spook him. I needed to create a scenario so alarming that his first instinct would be to check on the most valuable thing in his life: his stolen money. The plan was audacious, and it required me to dive deeper into my role as the crazy old lady than ever before. For a few days, I escalated my symptoms. I started leaving cupboard doors wide open. I put a carton of milk in the laundry room. Little things to reinforce his narrative that I was losing my grip. The final piece of the trap involved his father's watch. It was a vintage Omega, the one thing of real sentimental value he owned. He kept it in a velvet-lined box on his dresser.
The morning of the operation, my hands trembled, but it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. After David left for a Rotary Club lunch, Brenda came down. I handed her a small pair of binoculars I used for bird watching. "There's a knot in the floorboards up there, just over his desk," I said, pointing at the ceiling. "I poked it out years ago when I was looking for a leak. You can see straight down if you lie flat. You are going to be my eye in the sky. Watch his hands. Every number. Don't look away for a second." I waited for him to come home. He found me in the living room, wringing my hands with tears in my eyes. Oh, David, I can't find it," I wailed. "Can't find what, Maggie?" he asked, his voice weary, already burdened by his crazy wife. "Your father's watch. I wanted to polish the silver box for you as a surprise, and now it's gone. The whole box is gone. I've looked everywhere." I was genuinely crying now, not for the fictional loss of the watch, but for the very real loss of the man I thought I had married. Just as I had predicted, a switch flipped in his eyes. His sentimental attachment to the watch was eclipsed by a flash of pure, terrified greed. If the watch was gone, what else might be missing? What other things had his unstable wife managed to lose or give away? "Stay right here," he commanded, his voice tight. "Don't touch anything." He stormed into his study and slammed the door. Upstairs, Brenda was in position. I stood in the hallway, my ear pressed to the wood, listening. I heard him muttering, rummaging around. Then I heard the telltale scrape of the painting being moved. My heart hammered in my chest. "Come on, Brenda," I thought. "Come on." After a few agonizing minutes, the painting scraped back into place and the door flew open. David stood there, his face pale with relief and fury. He held up the velvet box. "I found it, Maggie," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "You put it in the filing cabinet, under W, for watch. You see what I mean? You just can't keep track of things anymore." He went to the kitchen to pour himself a stiff drink, and I scurried to the attic stairs. I met Brenda at the top. She was shaking, her face flushed with excitement. In her palm was a scrap of paper. On it, she'd scribbled 22, 8, 35. I know this is hard to believe, but David really had thought of everything, or so he thought. When you are a cornered rat, you will find a way to break through any wall. We had the combination. It felt like we'd won the war, but it was just one battle. We still had to get into the safe without him knowing, find documents we could understand, and figure out what to do with them. David worked from home 2 days a week, and his trips out were getting shorter and more unpredictable. He was like a dragon guarding his hoard. We needed help. Real, professional help. My mind went to George, our accountant for over 30 years. He and his wife Carol used to come over for barbecues. George knew our finances inside and out. He would be horrified by David's deception. He had to be. The next day, I called his office. His secretary put me right through. "George, it's Maggie Thompson," I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. "Ah, Maggie, how are you?" he said, his voice booming with a familiarity that felt fake. I'm a bit confused, George, and I was hoping you could help. I seem to have misplaced the paperwork from our last tax season, and David's out. Could you possibly send me a copy of our portfolio summary? The full one?" There was a pause, a chilly, professional silence. "Ah," he said, his voice changing, becoming softer, more careful. Maggie, you know you don't need to worry your head about these things. David handles everything so beautifully. Why don't you just relax, and I'll mention to him that you called. We don't want to bother you with unnecessary paperwork, do we?" It was a punch to the gut. The same patronizing tone, the same dismissive gentleness. David had gotten to him. He'd laid the groundwork, telling our friends and our financial advisors that my wife was unwell, not to be taken seriously. I was a non-person. My signature meant nothing. My inquiries were the ramblings of a sick mind. We were completely and utterly on our own. I hung up the phone, a cold dread washing over me. We had the combination to the safe, but we were financial amateurs up against a professional crook with a network of enablers. Brenda found me staring out the window, defeated. "He got to him," I said, quietly. "Our accountant. He thinks I'm crazy, too." Brenda sat beside me, her expression grim. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our isolation settling over us. And then her eyes lit up with a strange light. It was the flicker of a buried memory. "David," she said slowly, "when he talks to Arthur, he calls it his insurance policy. He was bragging one night. He said even if a safcracker got the combination and a lawyer got the papers, they'd never break the encryption without the key. He said, and the best part is, she dusts it every week and has no idea. He laughed, she said. He said, it's the ugly duck." The ugly duck, a hideous hand-carved duck decoy David's grandfather had made. It sat on the corner of his bookshelf, collecting dust. It was so ugly, it was practically invisible.
Suddenly, I knew what we had to do.
That night, after I was sure David was in a deep sleep, I crept into his study. My hands were perfectly steady. I went to the bookshelf and picked up the duck. It was heavier than it should have been. I twisted the head and it came loose with a soft click. Inside, nestled in a bed of felt, was a tiny USB drive. His entire financial betrayal, his escape plan, his life's work of deception was literally hidden inside an ugly duck. I took a deep breath. Brenda and I had the safe combination, and now we had the key. The only thing left to do was to unlock the door to his destruction. Holding that ugly duck in my hand felt like holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. For the next 2 days, the USB drive sat in my jewelry box, hidden beneath my mother's pearls, a tiny stick of plastic containing an entire world of betrayal. David was a ghost in the house now. I saw him only for his deceptions. Every "how are you, dear?" was a lie. Every sigh of feigned concern was an insult. The politeness of our 40-year marriage had become the most grotesque kind of theater. We were just waiting for the curtain to fall. Our window of opportunity came on a Wednesday. David had a full-day meeting with a major client downtown, one of those events that was catered and would certainly involve cocktails afterward. He wouldn't be home before 7. The minute his car cleared the driveway, the house came alive. Brenda was down the stairs in an instant, her face a mixture of terror and steely resolve. It was time. We went to his study and I closed the door behind us. The room felt different now, charged with secrets. I walked to the painting, the kitschy landscape I had loathed for 30 years, and lifted it off the wall. The small gray circle of the safe was embedded flush with the plaster, smug and silent. My fingers trembled as I reached for the dial. 22 to the right, I whispered, my voice hoarse. The tumblers clicked softly. 8 to the left, another click. 35 to the right. There was a final solid thunk, and the door swung open, with the faint hiss of displaced air. Inside were neat stacks of papers, foreign bank statements, and several passports. One was his, one was mine, long expired, and one was a brand new one issued to him just 2 months ago. There were also legal documents, thick and imposing. Brenda took the papers and I reached for the duck decoy on the bookshelf, retrieving the USB key. We didn't dare use his computer. We used the old laptop our son had left in his bedroom, a slow, clunky machine that hadn't been touched in years. I plugged in the key. A single folder appeared on the screen, titled Contingency. Inside was a web of spreadsheets and password-protected documents. Try the date he opened the account, I guessed. Brenda typed in the numbers from one of the bank statements. Access denied. Try our anniversary. Denied. Try his father's birthday. Denied. What's the one thing he thinks I'm too stupid to know? I murmured, thinking aloud. And then it hit me. Try the ticker symbol for the first stock I ever picked. The one he always said was dumb luck. AGI. Brenda's fingers flew across the keyboard. Access granted. The screen filled with the architecture of my husband's treachery. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. It was all there. A Cayman Islands corporation. The Antilles account with a balance that made me faint. But it was the other files that were the most chilling. There was a file labeled Maggie Medical, filled with scanned copies of my symptoms, meticulously documented in his own handwriting. Forgot stove was on, appeared disoriented, confused me with son. He'd been building his case for months. There was a draft of a legal document that would give him complete control over my assets, my medical care, my very life. There was also a file labeled Asset Liquidation Plan. He was planning to have me committed the week after he returned from Curacao. Once he had power of attorney, he would sell this house, sell the lake cabin, cash out every joint retirement account, and move the entire sum to the offshore account, where it would become untouchable. Our entire 41-year life liquidated and hidden. And then we found the folder marked B. It contained a single document, a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires in Brenda's name, scheduled to depart the day after he sold the house.
There was no matching ticket for him. He wasn't taking his mistress to paradise. He was shipping his problem to another continent with a few $1,000s of hush money. Brenda stared at the screen, her face ashen. The last of her illusions crumpled into dust. He wasn't going to save her. He was going to dispose of her, just like he was disposing of me. She looked up from the screen, her eyes locking with mine. In that moment, we were no longer a wronged wife and a naive mistress. We were a team.
"We can't fight this alone," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "My cousin, her college roommate, became a lawyer, the kind of lawyer men like David have nightmares about. Her name is Anita Sharma." Anita Sharma's office wasn't in a stuffy downtown high-rise. It was in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and steel beams. She was a woman in her late 40s with a severe black bob, eyes that missed nothing, and a handshake that could crush walnuts. We laid out the entire sordid story, pushing the bank statements and David's printed out plans across her polished concrete desk. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair and was silent for a full minute. I thought she was going to tell us we were crazy, that it was too complicated. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Gentlemen," she said to the empty room, "start your engines." "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to file an emergency ex parte motion with the family court tomorrow morning. We'll cite risk of immediate and irreparable financial harm and flight risk. We will request a temporary injunction freezing every known asset, domestic and international. The Curacao account will be a little trickier, but the bank has a branch in New York, which gives us jurisdiction. It will be an ambush. He will not see it coming." She then turned to Brenda. "And Miss Evans, you will be my star witness to his premeditated fraud. We will not only secure your safety, but sue for damages. He didn't just break your heart, he used false pretenses to imprison you and endanger your well-being." For the first time in months, I felt the ground beneath my feet solidify. The day David was due to leave for Curacao was a Thursday. Anita's timing was surgical. She waited until the market closed on Wednesday, then filed the injunction electronically. By the time he woke up Thursday morning, his financial world was encased in ice. He just didn't know it yet. I went about my morning routine, playing the part of the fading, doddering wife for the last time. I made his coffee, managing to look confused about which end of the spoon to use. He packed his carry-on bag, whistling. He thought he was home free. At 10 a.m., our doorbell rang. David answered it, expecting his airport taxi. Instead, he was met by a stone-faced process server who handed him a thick stack of documents. I watched from the kitchen as the blood drained from his face. His confident smirk collapsed into a mask of stunned disbelief. He looked up from the papers, his eyes finding mine across the room. The vacant, confused look he was used to seeing was gone. In its place was cold, clear, intelligent fury. He knew. He stormed into the kitchen. "What is this?" he roared, shaking the papers at me. "This is your doing. What lies have you been telling people?" "It's all true, David. Every word." "You can't prove any of it. It's the ravings of a crazy woman." And on that cue, a figure descended the attic stairs and walked into the kitchen. Brenda stood there, no longer a frightened mouse, but a woman who had found her voice. She wasn't looking at him with adoration or fear. She was looking at him with pity. David stared at her, then at me, then back at her, his mind struggling to compute the impossible reality that his two victims were standing side by side, united against him. It was a beautiful sight. His jaw worked, but no sounds came out. The great manipulator was speechless. "Your plane leaves in 3 hours, David, but your money isn't going with you. In fact, nothing in this house is yours anymore. We've changed the locks. A restraining order says you can't come within 500 feet of me or Brenda. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag. Enjoy your flight."
The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Brenda's testimony and the contents of that USB drive, David's case was indefensible. The court awarded me the house, the cabin, and 70% of all marital assets, including a huge portion of the now frozen offshore account, as punitive damages. Brenda received a substantial settlement, enough for her to get a new apartment, a new car, and start her life over, free and clear. David was left with a mountain of legal bills and a reputation so tarnished he'd never work in finance again. I sold the house. There were too many ghosts in those walls. Brenda and I, bound by our shared trauma, have become unlikely but inseparable friends. We meet for lunch every Tuesday. We laugh about how we, the two women he thought were so disposable, so weak, were the authors of his downfall. He underestimated me for 41 years. He saw me as a quiet homemaker, a wife, a mother, an accessory to his life. He never bothered to look closer and see the intelligent, resourceful woman who was perfectly capable of taking him for everything he had the second he pushed for too far. He tried to lock me in a prison of the mind, but all he did was hand me the key to his own. What would you do in my place? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.